Okay, so welcome to the Orson Boon podcast. I'm sat here with a friend of mine, Patrick Morton. He's a Canadian ex-banker,
Yeah, I hate to say it, but that's the case.
ex-banker, so potentially one of the enemy, who is basically give us a bit of background on
Yeah,
yourself.
so I came out of the investment banking industry for about 15 years. I've been in the UK for about seven, and over the last 3 years, discovered cannabis. I had no prior knowledge, but because Canada is in the process of legalizing, it's been front page news for several years now. And I started to read about it and was absolutely blown away to learn about the endocannabinoid system, the nature of cannabinoids, THC, CBD, etc. That not only is it not bad for you, but it's actually a medicine. And I've been lied to my whole life by teachers, schools, even parents. Not lied to, but misinformed and misdirected. And so as I learned more and more, I realized like this is incredible. It's changing the world. It's changing communities and society. And realized I don't want to be working in the corporate world anymore, doing the rat race. Painfully trudging to work 12 hours a day. So finally quit my job about a year ago, and I've been involved in the cannabis industry ever since.
So when you sort of mentioned that, you feel like you've been lied to, um, you growing up in Canada we always think Canada being a fairly liberal, sort of relaxed sort of space when it comes to sort of cannabis. So I'm assuming that you didn't grow up being a sort of a cannabis user or anything like that. Was that because of, your upbringing, your schooling, religion, or?
Yeah, it was a combination of those three things: upbringing, schooling, and religion. My parents sort of warned me that cannabis kills your brain cells, it makes you lazy and dumb, it's a gateway drug. And that's the same message that I would get from school and the religious authorities, people of authority in general. I grew up in Vancouver, the home of BC Bud, and I throughout my teenage years, I had friends that were smoking it, doing it. Smart kids, like totally functional, but who would have access to tons of weed. I had friends that were dealing bricks of it. I ended up having friends that got very deep into the drug trade and went off in the wrong direction. But suffice to say, like I was aware of it and I was around it, but because of my fear of this thing is a dangerous drug, I never touched it. And it's only 25 years later that I've kind of discovered it as, among other things, an incredible alternative to alcohol. I've been poisoning myself with alcohol for 20 years when I had this like far safer, far better alternative all along.
I know that it's a tricky one because it's pretty much the same in the UK. Although I don't think our drugs education is as sort of extreme as maybe like North America, Canada could be. But certainly for us, it was always the same sort of rhetoric. Cannabis will make you stupid. I never thought of cannabis being any sort of medicine. That totally escaped me. And it was only actually when I was working in a private rehabilitation centre that one of the clients' husbands came in, and she sadly passed away years ago, so I can talk about it. But she had Huntington's disease, which is this really, really tricky neurodegenerative disorder, which is incredibly cruel. It robs you of everything. It robs you of your ability to talk, to be able to self-care, to swallow, to eat properly. It's a horrendous condition. And at the time, we were doing some drug trials with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, and they'd just started trialing this drug called Nabulone. And Nabulone was a synthetic THC drug. And they came to us and they were like, look, we need to sort of trial this out with people. We think it's going to certainly help the motor skills of people with Huntington's, because one of the side effects is they suffer from terrible involuntary movements, and because their bodies are constantly jerking and moving the whole time, they burn through 10 to 15,000 calories worth of food every single day. So they thought that actually THC could really sort of help calm the mind down, calm the body down, like it does with a lot of people. And I remember taking this lady into this sort of specialist department where we had, like water beds and, a multi-sensory style room, explaining to her that I was going to give her this joint. And, you could see that she was fairly excited about this. And bearing in mind that this person, I'd never heard her speak. She couldn't talk. She couldn't verbalise. Everything was through sign language because she'd lost the ability, to be able to talk. So I explained to her, I was just like, look, your husband's giving me these joints. I'm going to light it up. I'm going to give it to you, and that's it. We're just. There was no protocols. We weren't allowed to do this. It's not the done thing necessarily, but we're just like, well, this poor lady's on like 63 different tablets a day, and they're not working for her. So I lit up this joint, gave it to her, and her hand just came out and sort of grabbed this joint between her two fingers and stuffed it into her mouth. And I just remember just going, shaking away, bless her, trying to inhale in as much of this smoke as possible. And she finished this joint, which was probably only about 3.5 inches long, within about 4 or 5 pulls.
Wow.
And it was incredible. I was watching her, anxious, nervous, thinking, oh, is this a good idea? I'd used cannabis, in my younger years, purely recreationally, when you're out with friends, after a couple of beers. And although I enjoyed it, it was, I never thought of it as a medicine. It was just like, well, this is just something I'm going to take just to get high. And you saw this lady who was rigid, so she's all tight up, pulled up in a fetal position because all of her muscles all tighten up like this. And you could see her whole physiology just change. And she opened her eyes and she said, thank you to me. And for 6-7 hours, she was a different person. She was able to stretch out her body. Her hands went from being contoured, tight, little knots. Her fingers just released themselves. And I remember thinking to myself at that point, I was just like, actually, damn, what have I just witnessed here? This is something that I occasionally recreationally smoke with friends after a couple of beers. It gets me high. I laugh. I eat pizza. I raid the fridge. I attack the ice cream. I sleep really well. I wake up in the morning feeling fine. But I've got somebody here who's on a plethora of nasty medications with horrendous side effects, and this person's just been able to consume a very, very small amount of cannabis and has got 7 hours of release, from this horrendous disease that, if we're being honest, if the drugs we were giving her worked and they had the same result, you'd be like, okay, what's the issue? Yeah. This had such a fundamental shift. It made such a huge difference to this person's life. And it was from that moment on, I remember going home and just thinking to myself, I need to learn a hell of a lot more about cannabis. Yeah. And that was the defining moment in my life. Wow. I was just like, look, I'm going to look into this and start reading about it. And then you started understanding the endocannabinoid system. It wasn't even talked about that much back then. I mean, this is 20 years ago. I was in my early 20s. And from that day on, it's just been a passion of mine where it's like, look, if this can have such a huge reaction, a huge response with somebody who is terminally ill, there's no out for Huntington's. Right. That is it. Once you've got it, there is no cure. There's very little we can do to make their lives easier. But there is this natural plant which she could just smoke and have instant results. I mean, the results were, you saw them within 30 seconds.
It's unreal. So had she used cannabis before? She had some knowledge? Okay.
Yeah, so her husband sort of said to us, actually, she would use cannabis to help with her symptoms before she got to that state where she had to go into care. She had to have extra support because she was no longer able to look after herself in any way. You know, she couldn't feed herself. She couldn't wash, bath, clothe herself.
The number of stories that I've heard similar to this, but across an innumerable spectrum of different ailments, debilitating chronic pain, anxiety, depression, or like acute health problems, cancer even, of people's first-hand accounts or personal stories where all hope was lost, and then this was a last-ditch effort, and their whole outlook was changed, either as a short-term symptom relief thing, like in a palliative care sense, or, you know, I've heard, and as have you, I'm sure, many first-hand accounts of like, I had a terminal disease, or my child had a terminal disease, and all kind of mainstream medicine treatment had been given up, and this is a last-ditch effort. And not only did it help with symptoms, but actually starts reversing the disease, or causation, correlation, who knows, but there's something going on here. And the thing that I always come back to is, you know, the endocannabinoid system, as you just pointed out, it's been 50 years or something like that since it's been discovered, or at least the cannabinoids have been discovered in the 60s. But no large-scale research has been done because all these governments have banned it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I think cannabis actually is one of the most, if not the most studied plant on Earth. However, 99.99% of the studies commissioned to look into cannabis have all been, their target has been to find something negative. This is, cannabis really has been a plant that has been demonized, victimized for a very, very, very long time now. You know, completely attacked over the last sort of 70 odd years. It's crazy. You know, I mean, a few years before I was born in the UK, doctors could still prescribe cannabis. And, you know, it's the early 70s that they changed that. You know, royalty have used cannabis in the past. They might still be using cannabis now. I mean, who knows? It is clearly a fascinating plant. And like I always say to everybody who I meet who's a little bit skeptical of it, we are hardwired to interact with this substance, with cannabinoids. So we're either sort of saying to ourselves that nature has fundamentally wired us to use something that is wrong, so nature is wrong, the creator is wrong, or we're being stopped using it because actually I think as a general wellness medication, as a wellness product, as you know, I think that's where its real magic lies. I think we've got to be, you know, recent years since, you know, like Rick Simpson, another Canadian, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Rick Simpson's Canadian, you know, came out talking about the RSO oil and all of his work. You know, there's still been even with all the anecdotal evidence that he's been able to present and other people like him have been able to present, I think we've still got to be careful of this sort of culture in the cannabis community where they're just like, well, cannabis fixes everything, and that's it's a tricky conversation. It's very emotive because it upsets a lot of people. Where, you know, a lot of people think that actually cannabis is this wonder drug; it will cure everything. But I've seen many times over in my work now and in my career working in medicine that actually, yes, it can have huge, you know, benefits to people, but it's not a cure-all, you know. And, you know, illnesses and disease in humanity is a very, very complex issue, and I don't think you can go to yourself, right, well, I've got cancer, and if I take cannabis, it's going to guarantee to cure me. But saying that, you know, on my journeys, I have met people, you know, lots and lots of people now who have had life-threatening diseases where the medical industry and the medical services are just, they're at a loss. They don't know what to do. They don't understand it. And as far as they're concerned, well, you know, you just really need to go home and get ready for the inevitable. and these people do bounce back, and that's obviously very, very exciting. I would like to see cannabis almost as a daily supplement for people. I think it's vital, and we see this now with, like in the UK. Obviously, a couple of months ago during the summer, the UK government's now come out after a load of pressure because of the Billy Caldwell and Alfie Dingley cases, those two young boys who suffered from, chronic epilepsy, and the very public sort of cases of the Home Office, taking the medicine off Charlotte Caldwell, and then Sadiq Javid, the Home Secretary, then sort of come out saying, look, the government is now going to review this, and we're going to look at sort of providing cannabis-derived medications, for these children, because we know that, some of these kids, with Dravet syndrome, an extreme case of epilepsy where these poor children can have multiple seizures, hundreds and hundreds of seizures in a 24-hour period. The stress and the damage that does to children, and at the same time we're pumping them full of these chemical cocktails which are clearly not actually affecting them at all. I mean, in a positive way. I mean, the long-term damage and side effects of these drugs is horrendous. And yet we sort of see the fact that they can introduce a cannabis-based tincture into their diet, into their life, and seizures can almost just disappear in some cases in hours or in days, where their lives are completely changed around. And
and the thing about that, like, there's products out there that people have been using for years in the sort of quasi nutraceutical market that are cannabis based, that people are using to dramatically solve epileptic type situations, and many others. And then there's also, at the other end of the spectrum, there's these like hardcore pharmaceutical drugs that have been developed, cannabinoid based drugs that have developed following the rigorous scientific process and are now FDA approved to treat these things, to treat various illnesses. And it just seems to me like the argument about cannabis being useful as a medicine is settled. There's no question. It is a medicine, and there's countless stories like the ones of Caldwell and Dingley. But then so as a society, I think pretty much everyone who has looked at that issue acknowledges this is a medicine. But then on the other hand, we also talk about it being a dangerous drug, and then that it can lead to overdoses, or it can lead. In the UK, there's all this talk about high strength skunk, which is, to me, something I've never heard of coming from Canada.
But this is an interesting thing, and this is something that I wanted to ask you, because I mean, this seems to be this skunk sort of craze and high strength THC and psychosis. Very much seems to be the psychosis of the British government, because I mean, I know that whenever I go to America, I mean, you never hear about skunk. They're never talking about psychosis. Yeah. And Canada's obviously a huge cannabis-loving country. I mean, is that ever in the media? Is that a concern?
Well, the short answer is like absolutely not. So, and it's borne out in the data, right? So we've had legal medicinal cannabis in North America in some form or other for over 15 years. And the first 10, 12 years of that, there wasn't that much uptake for various reasons in terms of the medical use of cannabis. But in the last 5 years, a combination of changes in the laws, as well as the rise of the recreational adult use markets in the US, there's been an explosion in awareness, in the number of medicinal users in North America, and obviously the recreational market. And with that massive increase in consumption, there's been no increase in the statistical rate of many of these psychological issues like schizophrenia or psychosis, as far as can be ascertained by the available data. So like Colorado, Washington State, they've had legal recreational cannabis for 4.5-5 years now. and consumption is going up like that. So like sales of cannabis are tripling over the last 5 years, quadrupling, and you see no increase in hospital room visits that are correlating psychotic break with cannabis use. So I think from my standpoint, that should be debunked, that idea that cannabis causes these psychological issues, or even in my opinion there's like this link between them. I think that should be broken and disregarded, but nonetheless it exists. But I will say, like, again, in North America, I had never heard the term skunk, and we do understand the difference in potency depending on what product you're taking, the ratios and the percentages, and the higher THC and that kind of thing. But like, it does not exist, as far as I'm concerned, in Canada. The concept of skunk.
It's an odd one, because I think clearly we've got to have the adult conversation about, some people can be affected by substances in their lives. I've used cannabis pretty much every single day for 22 years. I've had access to skunk. I've had access to, concentrates, which are 3 or 4 times stronger than skunk. And there has been the odd occasion, and a very, very, very odd occasion, where I have maybe taken too much and I've noticed my thought patterns start to become a little bit dark, a little bit more uncomfortable. You might start getting a little bit more paranoid. I remember when I took an edible, and it was about 120 milligrams of THC. And
well, there you go.
I know.
That's about 10 or 12 times a typical dose, right?
Typically, in Canada, in California, it would be probably like 10 or 12 doses in a legal product. But nonetheless, I found myself in a very, very awkward situation. I felt very uncomfortable. I was absolutely paranoid. I mean, I knew what was going on in my head. I knew that I was able to rationalize and go, look, you have consumed this, and this is why you are feeling this. But for a period of time, I doubted my life, my business, my marriage, my friendships. Everything was just sort of swirling around my head. And absolutely, do you know what? That's probably subjective and personal to me, because I know plenty of other people who'll chew down 120 milligrams of THC in an edible, and they'll be absolutely fine. They'll be having the best time of their lives. But I think my point I'm trying to make is that there's obviously there needs to be education. I think humans historically we will tend to overuse something, which brings us pleasure, brings us joy. We are programmed to do that. That's just how we work. And I think that can be combated. Anything negative which we read about could be combated by legalization. So everybody knows that they're actually buying a really solid, clean product. You know the provenance of it. You know where it's come from, who's grown it. It's been lab tested. It is certified. And I struggle with this with our government in the UK, where they will, bend over backwards and state that we are doing this to protect people. This is what we're doing. We need to protect you from these sort of substances. Yet the very system they put in, prohibition. The other day I was in Parliament and I went to this new launch of the Children's Inquiry by Voltfast. And this really hit home with me. I was absolutely amazed. The arrests and criminalisation of under 18 children for possession or dealing cannabis in the UK has gone up 26% in the last couple of years. We are now criminalising more children under 18 as drug dealers, drug pushers, drug users than we are adults over 18.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's insane.
the very system that has
Yeah.
been set up to protect the vulnerable, the under 18s, the children, the vulnerable people in society, as the government would say,
Yeah.
is actually the one thing now which is crippling these youngsters, because people do use drugs. You're never going to stop teenagers from exploring consciousness and using substances. We've all been there, we've all done it. We've got to have that realistic conversation. Everybody does it. Everyone will try it. But because of the criminalisation aspect of it, we are now penalising youngsters who are, we're penalising them as dealers, when actually all they're doing is 15 of them will all throw in like a tenner, buy a bag of weed and share it out because it's cheaper and they, but if that youngster, that 16, 17-year-old gets caught with that, he'll get done for dealing, social dealing.
Right.
And I just think it's nuts that that figure's gone up 26%.
That is an insane number. I can tell you the whole movement in Canada to legalize was framed successfully, and the public, after being educated, bought in with this framing, was to protect kids, because everybody knows in a black market, kids have quite easy access, like in high schools and playgrounds and stuff like that. There's always somebody's friend is a dealer or this and that, and the fact that it's forbidden makes it more appealing. And I think from a logical standpoint, I think we can all see why making this the forbidden fruit puts kids even more at risk than there would be if you had a kind of legal regulated market. And you explain to your 12-year-old, 11, 12-year-old kids who are out there, or 13, 14, 15, they have the ability to use logic and to use their judgment if you explain to them the risks and why at this age it's really not bad. It's not a good idea to be using it. But the fact when you just shut the door and say like, nothing to see here, kid, moving along, don't look at this, you're just creating that forbidden fruit kind of atmosphere. So up 26%. Do you, when I hear these kinds of things, it makes me wonder, is there an evil vested interest here that's not focused on the well-being of the population and is focused on, maintaining special interest groups and corporate interests, that kind of thing? If you put your conspiracy theory hat on, do you actually buy into these kinds of ideas? Because, as an outsider, if you look at it, once you're educated, you're like, okay, we need to change all these laws right away, stop this madness. But the madness continues, and it's not for 1 year or 2 years. It's been 50 years of this, right? So
and some. I think from my personal experience, I started using cannabis because my family doctor actually sort of recommended it to me loosely, completely unofficially. She was a family friend of ours, and when I was 15, 16, I suffered from terrible insomnia. Just couldn't sleep. I've always had a very, very busy brain, and probably a little bit of ADHD, a little bit on the spectrum, and that has always been tricky to sort of shut down. And then what the problem is, what I was doing is that I was then overusing, abusing sleep medication to help knock me out, or alcohol, or other substances like codeine and things. And
legally or illegal? Alcohol, I guess, technically illegally.
Alcohol is illegally, but tablets. You just find them in your parents' meds cupboard, and you're just like, well, I'm not sleeping. I'm not going to tell them about it, so I'll just use them. And so for me, cannabis has always been this wonderful thing to relax the brain, just to round off those edges. Instead of your brain just firing away, being really sharp, and there's just so much traffic and noise going through it. It was just able to round it all off, and allow life as an experience to be a lot easier. I wouldn't say I've ever abused cannabis. It's not a substance that I find I can take too much without having a negative reaction. Like when I took the edible, it gave me a negative reaction. It gave me a slap around the face going, that was a bit silly.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in microdosing, so using much smaller amounts of it, but using them potentially more regularly. So, now I've got down to a point where I'm actually only using a gram of cannabis a month in an oil form. So I've really been able to tie it down.
Okay.
Because I wanted to sort of I wanted to get my body into a state where it would give me maximum results with the least amount of cannabis going into the system. Because for me, as much as I do enjoy at times getting what I'd call traditionally high, where I'm super relaxed, a little bit giggly, my mind can just wander. I don't find that state particularly helpful for me a lot of the time, where actually I like to be in control of my mind. I like to be in control of my body. I don't want to be, super high.
Yeah.
That's not something, absolutely, I do enjoy it when the time is right. But it's rare that I ever get myself to that point.
So a gram a month, but spread out on a daily basis. So that really is kind of a microdose. I mean, people who are regular users often use a gram a day, right?
I know people who roll up a gram just in their joints, and they'll smoke 5-10 of those a day.
There you go.
And that's for them.
Yeah.
This is the thing, is that and I think this is one of the reasons why it's been so difficult to potentially turn it into a medication, so to speak, a traditional medication, because it is so personal and subjective to us. It affects me. How I use cannabis is perfect for me, and it makes me feel great, and I can tick through life happy as Larry. Other people go, dude, that's not going to touch the sides. That's going to do absolutely nothing. It's going to do nothing for me. I'm like, that's fine. We're all completely different. But I think this is one of the hurdles of creating medical cannabis, because I've met thousands and thousands of medical cannabis users now over the last sort of few years, and all of them have their own routine. All of them have their own methods of consumption, the way they do it, the timings, all this sort of jazz. It's not. I don't think you can turn this into a tablet like a codeine tablet. I could buy codeine anywhere in the world, and it's always going to be the same. Right. It's an opiate-based drug. It will do this. But with cannabis, I think it's very, very tricky. And I think this is one of the big concerns with now the fact that the Home Office have come out saying, well, we're going to allow doctors to prescribe cannabis-derived medications. And the medical community are up in arms. They're confused, they're upset. They're like, well, what the hell does that mean? A cannabis-derived medication?
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
I smoke this particular strain and it works wonders for my life. But the British government aren't going to allow a medication which is smokable, because there's no medication in the UK that you smoke.
I think there is a massive sort of cognitive dissonance that's happening in society as it pertains to cannabis. A friend of mine was telling me the story about her brother, 27-year-old brother, about a year ago, who had a form of depression fairly severe and was on a regime of antidepressants. His doctor was away or retired or changed, kind of was no longer in the picture. And the new doctor who took over his file had an opinion that he should use different antidepressants, and switched him off in one fell swoop from his existing regime to another. Suicidal thoughts, killed himself within 24 hours of changing the regime. So when we talk about the existing available, medically approved pharmaceutical drugs used to treat things like anxiety or depression, and we talk about them as though they're precise and reliable and consistent. That's a massive misperception. There is a ton of trial and error when it comes to the medical system. Like, you're having a problem, some kind of a health problem, we'll throw you on this drug, see what happens. And if that doesn't work, we'll switch you on to the next one. And if we do something too abruptly, you're going to have a major change in your health that we're not really on top of. And in extreme cases, this type of thing can happen. With cannabis, our governments are extremely high-strung and extremely concerned about what will happen if you open the floodgates to society with cannabis. Like, we're going to have mass addiction or mass gateway drug kind of acceleration or escalation. Never been an overdose. Really not that much of a... I mean, you could argue that people are dependent. There are people who are dependent on cannabis, but it's not chemically addictive the way countless other pharmaceutical drugs are, like the whole opioid family. So for me, this cognitive dissonance is like we need to rapidly improve people's awareness of this. Like, on one hand, we're like stuffing people full of antidepressants and sleep aids you mentioned, which are not healthy and have a ton of negative effects on people's various organs and all that stuff, brain function, all that. Let's kind of change our perception about these products, meaning let's change our perception in a negative way, reduce our trust in those products, and then increase our trust in a natural product that's been around for millions of years, 5 million years of co-evolution with the human body. But anyway, that's like to me, the whole microdosing thing, we've talked about that before. It's fascinating, and again, there's not enough mainstream science around it to give it credibility, unfortunately. But the anecdotal evidence, people like yourself and countless others who find a massive improvement in their day-to-day lives by being able to use like a fraction of a dose, and it just smooths everything out.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is something I've always been really honest with people, is that life for a lot of people can be quite challenging. It can be quite tricky, and we all have vices. We all have certain behaviours to try and pacify us at times of stress. And I think yeah. In the UK, very much the same in North America, is that the alcohol industry is just perpetuated. It's sold to us as this is this party drug. So if you're happy, you're sad, whatever, good, bad, right or wrong, whatever state you find yourself in, you can always go down the pub, drink alcohol, drink wine, and we know the absolute destruction of alcohol. I mean, I saw it with my grandparents. Three of my grandparents are all alcoholics. My grandfather was an alcoholic and addicted to opiates after a nasty accident, and it totally destroyed him. It ravished him. He was became very violent, and that affected his relation. He was very aggressive towards my grandmother, because of his drink and drugs. To cope, she turned to drink. Right. And it's just this massively destructive sort of system in play. Yeah. Whereas, Bob Marley always said that, alcohol is the destruction, herb is the healer. Yeah. And I think society, we need to start going back to really looking at plant medicines. Yeah. I find plant medicines fascinating, and I've used many of the more traditional plant medicines in my life, and they've had vast benefits, to me, and everyone around me.
It is interesting, and I'm sort of finding myself becoming a crusader of sorts for cannabis and plant-based. That is a plant-based medicine, clearly. Cocaine and heroin are plant-based medicines as well, and so obviously with some tweaks, but you can't. In my mind, there's like a pretty clear distinction between coke and heroin as not being all that. I mean, this is obvious. These are super dangerous, highly addictive, and lethal. But are both plant based. Cannabis also plant based.
They're plant based. Absolutely, they've been derived from a plant, but they've been massively processed.
Yeah.
Whereas I argue cannabis, no one's on the street selling bags of coca leaves, which you're just going to chew.
Right.
So we know that anything mass processed is potentially bad for us. We talk about it with food.
Yeah.
Avoid processed foods.
Yeah.
Fast foods, anything processed, because it's had a lot of the original, goodness removed from it. Whereas cannabis is something which can be just grown in the ground, and you can harvest it, you dry it, and as simply as just rolling it into a joint or mixing it into a fat and a butter and turning it into something which you can eat like brownies, biscuits, cakes, even mix it into drinks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it's a different thing. Obviously opiate-based medication has been vital in society, and it will always remain to be very helpful. But the danger with it is that the overprescription of opiate-based drugs is vast, because it is that perfect repeat business model. I know a lot of people, in fact, who would look down at someone for smoking weed.
Right.
Like literally, they'd judge them. Oh, well, you deadbeat, you druggie. But the very same people can't get out of bed in the morning without having a coffee and a couple of diazepams.
Yeah.
And that is their routine, and they will, there's been their routine for years. And these are people who are educated, they're successful.
Yeah.
But they are drug addicts.
Yeah.
They're completely addicted to these pharmaceuticals.
It's a really fascinating issue, and there tends to be a lot of moral superiority around it. Obviously, I never drank coffee until I was 33. Then I discovered it, and
Really?
it changed my life, and I'm so much more productive. And I'm now, frankly, crossing over that threshold into dependency, where like, okay, if I don't have a coffee, then I'm not all that good during the day. So like,
my wife's exactly the same.
So, well, the thing about that, like, what do we aspire to as a society? Do we aspire to a society where everyone is highly fulfilled, satisfied, content, ambitious, motivated, and just doing great without the use of any mood-altering substance? Because in my mind, that could be that could be what our best case scenario is, like, where you wake up every day and you feel great because of you just have a fulfilling life and you're going for it and you're working towards a goal, all that stuff. All of these things fall on a spectrum to help your hard life get better. And in my mind, that term, like, you can't legislate morality, and we've been attempting to do that for decades, and it's like one vice is allowed and another one's not. To me, that's where we're completely screwed up right now. And frankly, why is it that I can get alcohol and drink myself into a stupor, destroy my liver, get cancer, etc., and not get legally smoke a joint that's completely natural, as we've been talking? But my point being, so what are we aiming for as a society? The option A, where like you're just happy and fulfilled and you don't need any of this stuff? Or are we aiming for a society where it's harm reduction, and let's try and moderate or minimize people's dependency? Because there is something to be said for, okay, what happens if you legalize cannabis? Consumption will go up. That's kind of what happened when we had prohibition. Alcohol consumption went down, and then removed it. Consumption went back up. So I get, like, my point being, like, is there a utopia where we can eliminate all of this? Do you think? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. I think, to be honest, with drug use, it's a very complex subject to really truly understand. I spent years working in drug rehab and drug therapy, and I worked with hundreds and hundreds of people who would be classified as drug addicts. And the one thing you notice with people is that people use substances to alter their perception, their realities. And you're going to get the people who are doing that because their realities are painful. You know, they're living in fear, they're living in pain, you know, they're living in negativity, you know, their lives are tough, their lives are challenging. And then you're going to get people who are going to use substances just because, again, not necessarily for any negativity, but they want to alter their perception. The issue is, with my personal opinion, the issue is with trying to prohibit people from using drugs is that ultimately, inherently, we all do it. You'll get up in the morning and drink your coffee to alter your state. You go from a state of waking up going, I'm feeling tired, I'm not focused, to needing to take something to change your state. You'll get people, you know, finishing work, going home, grabbing a glass of wine because they're stressed, chugging a bottle of red every single evening just to unwind so they can deal with the kids and, you know, all of that sort of jazz. And there is nothing wrong with that. You know, we all do it. We all look for things to alter how we feel. Because I think in truth, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you know, we're all human beings. We all struggle at times. We all have mental health issues. We all experience negativity, sadness, depression. And instead of sort of saying to somebody, no, you can't use this, I personally think we should be having a conversation going, okay, you know, you are experiencing this emotional state at the moment. You're in pain. You're angry. You're upset. You're sad. We can alter that state. You can alter it through exercise. You can alter it through, you know, diet. You can alter it through drug use. And I think as a society, instead of judging people like we do, and we do judge people who we consider to be the crackheads on the street, you know that. I mean, I saw this thing the other day where, I think it was on Facebook, where it's like, if you are sitting around judging someone who's smoking crack on the street and you're going home and smashing a bottle of wine every single night, you know, there is no difference. You're exactly the same. You know, you're probably doing it for the same reasons. They don't have the budget, and they're probably homeless, living on a cold street in England, so they need to smoke the crack to knock themselves out, to pass out. So hopefully, maybe they might want to wake up the next day. Maybe they don't. Yeah. And do you know what? How many people who work in the city, earning huge salaries with all the luxuries, the trappings of modern day life, do exactly the same?
So you might have seen as you were walking here. First of all, 100% right. I totally agree. Under the bridge on the way here, there's like a little bit of an encampment happening, and I've lived here for 2 years, and there's, you know, a little bit of a rotation of people who are sort of setting up camp there, and it's brutal, man. Like in this weather, it's freezing cold under the bridge, so there's like dirty water dropping off of the, you know, the overpass, and you can see what's going on there. Like, these are heavily addicted people. I happen to know that this park right across my house is like where they kind of come for refuge to get high once they score whatever drugs they're looking for. It's either amphetamines or heroin. Like, very obviously, when you look at them, you can tell that's what they're on. But their life revolves around fleeing abuse, frankly, because their homes are unsafe, etc. Everyone's got a different story, but it's like, you don't end up in the UK living on the streets. We're a wealthy society. You don't end up there unless you have a really terrible situation at home. So they're there in the cold, in the rain, dirty, without food, shelter, all that stuff. and then they're kind of shuttling back and forth at all crazy hours of the day, avoiding the police, like avoiding criminals and predatory drug dealers. And I'm like, when I walk by there, I'm of two minds. It annoys me because I'm like, this is like reducing the value of my property, and it's not nice to look at. And then on the other hand, I'm like, you fucking asshole. Like, how dare you? Can you, like, take a moment to imagine what it must be like to be out there? You have nowhere to go, no warm freaking bed to get into, no bathroom to use, no shower to use. Like, so there's this paradox of compassion and then arrogance. That's like, whenever I walk by there, I have that dichotomy. And it kind of comes, in large part, it comes down to our drug laws, because they're having to go into dark places, literally and figuratively, to get access to the thing that they're self-medicating with. It's unreliable. It's extremely addictive. Their life completely gets sidetracked. Once you're doing heroin, you're fucked, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a diatribe, but it's like there can be two opposing things that can be true. Like, on one hand, like, I want these guys earning money, getting jobs, and paying taxes for the benefit of everyone, but also I want society to have some compassion for them and get them their medicine. Like,
well, I think realistically, I mean, from my personal point of view, and I say this to a lot of people, and it's taken in different ways. I'm of the believer that actually, as society, we're only as strong as our weakest, our most vulnerable. And, moving forward, my interest in human evolution and helping society is that the reason why we see all this discourse, we see this misery, we see this mass homelessness, is because we're not taking care of society. We're very comfortable as society to push people into certain categories. If people are problems to us as a society, drug users, whatever, we'll move them out of the way. We'll push them to somewhere else. And that's out of sight, out of mind sort of mentality will only work for a certain period of time before you've got to, as society, and this is the thing, is start to look at why are there so many people like this? There is this mass discourse in our modern day society, and it affects an awful lot of people. A lot of people can hide it. I've hidden sadness behind, alcohol or drug consumption. I've been able to do that because I'm middle class. I have a good job. I have money. I have family. I have people who love me, who support me, who will help pick up the pieces. But I can't imagine where I would be if I didn't actually have that support structure. And actually, I would probably be in exactly the same situation as them.
yeah.
And then someone else would be walking past, looking at me, going, "Oh well, you're just a loser. I hope you die."
yeah.
Because there'd be one less of you. And I think it's tough. It's a tough one.
Because I think everyone will agree when if you can explain someone's story, dealing with a challenging background or trauma or lack of care, lack of access to education or whatever else. Like, if you can explain someone's story in a microsecond to a passerby, they'll have that compassion and they'll have that appreciation and understanding. But like, people are busy and wrapped up in their daily lives, and they're worried about their mortgage payments and their schedule and the BS, and you don't have enough energy or focus or attention to like take a moment to care, and then you have to like quickly observe something and then file it into your category. Is this person a good person or a bad person? Oh, they're a bum.
Oh, Jesus! I mean, I think all of us have been there. All of us have done it. I just feel that as a society we need to we need to start being a little bit more conscious about a lot of things instead of, I think inherently the human race, we're quite selfish. You know,
Right.
it is, I think it is very much about my world, my movie, I'm the star in this world, and, you know, I want to go through my world and my day-to-day business, and, you know, if something boosts me up and makes me feel great, I'll gravitate towards that and I'll fluff that up as well. But if something doesn't work for me, I'll just discard it and shift it to the side. You know, I think we are naturally very, very selfish.
Yeah.
As a species, you know, because it is all about me. It's all about what's affecting me, and
there is like a sort of a biological imperative to that, like an evolutionary justification, right? Like you have to look out for yourself, number one, to protect your own survivability, and then once you've done that, you can protect your family and you can care about that tight little unit, that little network. And then beyond that, you start thinking about, okay, people in other families that are close to me. And then we, as a society, are now way bigger than that little unit, right? Like me, my family, my friends. My community is so much bigger than that. And it's like all these people around me that aren't inside my little tent. And you have to like really use your imagination to care about them.
Absolutely. But I mean, you know, especially, you know, for people like us living in London, you know, which is this incredible multicultural, I mean, probably one of the most multicultural, diverse cities in the world, potentially. You know, we've got, it's a melting pot of the world. You know, we've got everybody here. You know, for me personally, I mean, I love it. I love being surrounded by, you know, different people from completely different worlds, different backgrounds. I think it's incredibly healthy. But with that, we also bring in all the different types of, you know, complex issues that people from all around the world, you know, sort of struggle with. And I'm of the belief that there just needs to be an awful lot more compassion, a little bit, and a lot more love towards all of us. And instead of judging, and this is what frustrates me with the government, and, you know, how they're so blind by the fact that, you know, people want to use, you know, plant medicines like cannabis, and, you know, they judge, they lock people up, they destroy their lives for making that choice. And I've always taken huge issue with the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, my body, this physical body of mine, this avatar, and it is the only possession of mine that I really truly own. It's me, right here, right now. It is me. And I get very frustrated with the fact that some other fellow human being thinks that he has the ignoral right of being able to say, you know what, Ors, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't believe, you know, in 2018, we still live by these sort of human design rules.
That concept, to me, I would put that into the personal freedoms, whatever umbrella. And it's a big theme in America. Like, the Americans are so proud of, like, you know, freedom, regardless of whether or not that's actually true in America. But that's kind of what they're.
But they do really fight for. I mean, that's
they do.
It was all about, you know, the Fifth Amendment, and
absolutely,
you know,
yeah.
I have the goddamn right to carry a machine gun.
Don't tread on me.
Don't tread on me.
Freedom of speech, all that stuff. But in the UK, certainly freedom, liberty, democracy is a paramount concepts. But it also feels like it's a little bit more hierarchical. It's a little bit more know your role, stay in line, do this and that, like follow the thing. And to me, it's like, I completely agree. Like, how dare you in 2018 tell me what I can do to my body? Like, I'm not hurting my neighbors. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not hurting myself. And yet the UK government, like, will come and seize my property, put me in jail if they knew.
Well, it's this sort of. I think we use the term nanny state in the UK, where, you know, we've now got the British government who are just like, whoa, no, you can't do that because, you know, well, I mean, we don't know why you can't do that. Yeah. We just decided that you're not allowed to do this. You can't do that. I mean, but I think it's a much deeper conversation, because ultimately it goes through everything, where nowadays in this age, you know, you can't just set up a business. You've got to get permits, licenses,
Yeah.
insurance, and all of these little hurdles. It's all about, I think it's a lot of it's about control.
Absolutely.
And, you know, for what reason, realistically, the reason behind that, I don't know. And, you know, like we sort of broached on earlier, I mean, you could send your conspiracist mind absolutely crazy.
Right.
And we were talking about that earlier, weren't we? You know, what?
Why are these laws still in place? I mean, if we are looking out for the goods of the people, shouldn't we be just rapidly overturning our drug laws and that kind of thing? So that brings up a conspiracy theory.
But right? Sure, I mean, it make perfect sense. You know, if we really are concerned about humanity and protecting, you know, our fellow countrymen and fellow human beings, then why would we be pushing the sale of cigarettes? Right. Like, I mean, I get that people like to smoke cigarettes, but we know cigarettes kill millions of people across the globe, millions of people every single year. And actually, my wife's aunt, the first time I met her was shortly after she'd been diagnosed with lung cancer. And this was a lady who'd worked her entire life. She had literally just retired. She had been a heavy smoker all of her life, but you know that is true. And she retired, and she went to go and have a medical checkup for some insurance policy kind of thing, and she was diagnosed with lung cancer. And within 4 months, she was dead because they put her on this aggressive chemotherapy regime where she couldn't eat, she couldn't drink, and you know it killed her. Yeah. And we know that this happens. This is a familiar story. You know, yeah. I've worked with lots of people with lung cancer over the years, in fact. And it seems bonkers that the British government make billions of pounds through taxation of cigarettes. And I don't know the UK figures, but I mean, you know, hundreds of thousands of people per year will potentially die because of the cancer caused by the fact that they've been smoking these things.
Yeah, and there, for me, there's a slight dilemma there, because on one hand, what we're just talking about was, how dare the government tell me what I can do to my body? Ignoring for a moment secondhand smoke, that you could be harming people near you, but you're deriving a lot of pleasure. Smokers really enjoy it, deriving a lot of personal pleasure from it, shortening their lifespan, and potentially going to have a very sad end. But I guess we can't. On one hand, we can't rail on the government and say, "Take your hands off my cannabis," and how dare you go? And then say like, "Well, you're allowing tobacco, and I'm against you allowing tobacco." Right? I'm like
so maybe
a bit torn on that.
Yeah, no. I agree, and it's a very, very solid point, because my wife is an occasional smoker, and you know, she's a long-term smoker, and then she sort of quit, and then she'll occasionally now have a cigarette, you know, if we're out. And she, you know, she'll say to me, you know, it's just my biggest love of life. You know, she's like, if I knew I could smoke cigarettes and I wasn't putting myself at risk, she said, I would just use it all the time. She said, because it's just, it's just this beautiful relationship she has with a cigarette. Yeah. And she's like, you know, I love it. I don't get it. I've never been into cigarettes at all. Oh,
they make me so sick, like nauseous. I'm so glad, frankly. Luck of the draw that when I smoke a cigarette, I feel like fucking puking. But for her, I just feel I feel sorry for her, because it's like one temptation that she has to fight her whole life.
Oh, she does. Yeah. I mean, she's a huge fan, and you know, her whole family pretty much are huge fans, you know, of it.
But she has to, you know, she has to kind of deal with that, like on a daily basis.
She's conscious. She's conscious of the fact that, you know, she's conscious of the fact that she's lost someone that she loved, because of, you know, the cancer was caused, you know, as far as the medical profession are concerned, was caused by cigarette.
Do you think we should ban? I mean, there is an argument here, like, okay, there's a distinction. And I do get this question, like, about smoking cannabis. Is that going to give you cancer? And as far as I'm aware, like, there's not any real data connecting smoking cannabis with cancer. However, obviously, there's mountains of it with cigarettes, but they have all of these chemicals, preservatives, carcinogens that are added into it.
But this is the crazy thing is ultimately natural tobacco.
Right.
The leaf is the same as just rolling up some cannabis and putting it into a joint. But this is the crazy situation, is that we live in a society where they add. I mean, over the years, I've heard plenty of different figures. I mean, but potentially hundreds of other chemicals and accelerants to help it burn, perfectly.
More uniformly and all
uniformly,
that.
so it's this perfect smoke.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously potentially the stuff which is causing us issues.
Yeah.
Tobacco, nicotine by itself, they're both interesting compounds. I was involved with a clinical psychiatrist, and when I was working with children, and she was looking at the potential of using very, very low doses of nicotine with children with severe autism to help the concentration, because actually the nicotine it can be very, very useful.
Wow.
So it's not to discredit and go, well, tobacco nicotine is bad. Tobacco, I would argue, is actually potentially it is a medicinal plant.
Right.
When I was on last year, I went on a retreat where we did a number of different sort of psychedelics, and one of the compounds that we used was this stuff called harpe or rape, and it's this stuff called harpe or rape. And it's a powdered mixture from like the Amazon, Peru. It's an ancient sort of snuff, and it's mainly based on tobacco. It's its main ingredient, but they'll throw in loads of other different sort of special herbs, and it's blown up your nose at force, and it's not nice. It's not pleasant. It feels like you've been shot through the head with this hot bullet.
Wow.
But the effect it gives you, the clarity, is phenomenal. So the ancient tribes use it before, or used to use it, or still do use it now, before they go hunting. So they kind of liken it almost a bit like cocaine, that sort of stimulant where you blast a bit up your nose and you're seeing clearly, you got energy. So I think tobacco is clearly a medicinal, has medicinal properties. I would argue, has interesting properties which could aid us.
And it's like these are cultural phenomena. I should have done my homework on the history of tobacco, but it's like brought back to Western world by explorers. I want to say Francis Drake. I'm completely way off on that, but the point being, didn't exist.
Someone will correct that.
Someone definitely. someone went abroad. It wasn't grown domestically and used in society.
No way.
In little tiny hamlets and villages. It was brought back, and then a cultural phenomenon, just like sugar and spices and all that stuff. Like when you introduce this thing, it spreads like wildfire because people gain a massive amount of pleasure from them. So kind of slightly goes back to the whole legislating morality. Like if this substance can bring a ton of pleasure, whether it be mental clarity, momentary increase in cognitive ability, or it's like whatever the many reasons that people smoke. One of which is a whatever, manual fixation, or like they need to have busy hands or whatever. But we can look at the terrible cost on society caused by big tobacco, as is popular to argue about. But you also have to, like, if you're gonna look at this thing fairly, you have to include the benefit to society. How many people have that pleasure, like, on a day-to-day basis? And that's the thing where I'm just like, oh man, it's not quite so easy to just say ban it all. Like, I'm
going to be realistic. I don't like the term ban. We know through the 20 prohibition here in the US.
Yeah.
Prohibiting, banning something, it's never going to work.
Work.
Human beings will just go,
makes it that much more appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a real life example. I remember when I was younger, I can't remember the exact year that it happened, but the British government banned magic mushrooms. I used to go into this little head shop where I used to live down in Worcestershire, and they'd sell magic mushrooms. And do you know what? I never bought them because you could walk into a shop and buy them. So I was just like, well, they're going to be crap, aren't they? I'm not going to buy them. As soon as they made it illegal,
wow.
2 weeks later, we were like, where the hell can we get some of these magic mushrooms from? And I was like 16.
Moly.
And
wow.
And it was only because the British government banned it that we were like,
made it suddenly.
Oh, okay. Well, these are clearly pretty good. And
that's amazing.
And that was it. Then we acquired them.
So that's interesting. So I would assume it wasn't like they first were approved of by the government and then they changed around. It was more like they had no idea. They didn't realize what was happening. Yeah. And then once they found out, then they banned.
They were just they'd left them alone.
Yeah.
They were completely unregulated, from what I believe. And then obviously at some point something happened. Maybe someone in the House of Lords sort of ate mushrooms and
so that then realized, oh wait, this is too much fun.
Spoke
we
to
can't
God.
let the people.
We're like, no, we're not going to let the people do this.
So on that note,
prohibition.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, CBD. So it's a legal substance. It's blowing up as far as people's awareness in the mainstream. And there are regulations around it, but it's generally fairly freely available in the UK and all that stuff. Do you think there could be some risk for people in the CBD industry as it becomes more popular? The government takes note, as they are. The MHRA and the Home Office are starting to scrutinize it a little bit. They have over the last 2 years.
I mean,
are they going to crack down and then cut people's access?
I think obviously, I'd like to think that they are more aware that they can't crack down on it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess we'll just have to see. I like to think that they couldn't, because it's actually sort of grown up into sort of a fairly large industry. There's hundreds of companies involved in the UK, who are selling CBD products. I think there's got to be some sort of regulation, because I think there's certainly like with every industry which is unregulated to a degree, there are people who are selling substandard products.
Yeah.
I would urge the British government not to sort of shut out the people who've been pushing these products and these brands and building up communities around this, because I think that would cause a huge amount of damage. And actually, I think this ties in loosely to what we were going to discuss with the whole Coca-Cola entering this sort of CBD market. I would like to think, and I think, if consumers really want to start to gain some sort of control to the type of products that they are likely to see, they need to sort of be sort of pushing and supporting the sort of the smaller homegrown brands, the artisan brands, who do this type of work, because ultimately companies like Coca-Cola are only looking to enter this space because they see market value, they see how they can boost profits. But where I seek solace is that I believe that a lot more people nowadays are much more conscious of where products come from. Are these companies paying tax? Are they looking after their staff? Are they just genuinely adding good value to this pretty tricky world that we live in? And I think if they're not, then morally you're going to have to make that decision if you're going to support them or not. Of course, people are going to continue to support people like Coca-Cola, Starbucks and all these other companies. But I think we're going to see a big shift in consumers taking a lot more control on the types of products they buy. I think a lot more people are becoming far more conscious on, the fact that these companies do basically take the piss. We're constantly reading about it in the newspapers that these huge multi-billion-dollar companies, they're not playing ball. They're not treating their staff right. They're not paying tax. They seem to be taking a lot more from our community, our society, than actually giving back. And realistically, without us, the everyday common person, you and I, the consumers, the people who spend the money, these companies don't exist. So actually, we are far more powerful than we realise. And the companies and the governments don't want us to necessarily realise that we are in control. If everyone tomorrow stopped buying Coke for 2 weeks, Coca-Cola is going to sit up and go, okay, shit, something massive's happened.
Yeah.
And that's the same with everything. People kick off with Starbucks, the fact that they make billions of pounds in the UK, don't pay any UK tax. Well, you know what, if you're really that upset about it, go and support a local coffee shop. The coffee's half the bloody price. No, they're not going to be 7 down one high street. So that's the only choice you've got. But Starbucks would sit up and they would listen. They would change their operating practices very, very quickly. But a lot of people are very happy just going about everyday stuff, and
it's really, I mean, from my standpoint, not as someone who's like in the traditional. My background is in the corporate world, and it's like money, and not that much personal interest in small products, companies, brands, community, business, that kind of thing. Traditionally, I would have said like the more money, the better. Like I don't care. The cheaper my can of Coke is, the more money I have at the end of the day. So I don't traditionally have like that much involvement in this side of the argument, but I can see it's so crystal clear to me now, like in the year and a half that I've been doing cannabis, I'm in both worlds. I'm dealing with the big multinational cannabis companies who are in a race to gain control of the global cannabis supply chain, and then I'm also meeting and talking with the small UK producers who are in sort of a gray market, slightly in the black market, but their focus when I talk to these guys is like, I'm helping people who have severe illnesses. The government is not giving them access to medicine, and my business, privately, in the shadows, is to create medicine to help people with illnesses. And it's like,
thank God for those people.
And I've been it's so, yeah, absolutely. And I've been realizing like, they're more fun to be around, frankly. Like these people have a story, they're authentic, they're doing something for the world other than, following the bottom line. And like I have a choice going forward. Who am I going to do business with, as they say, whatever, in quotes. And I'm like, do I want to stay with these corporate guys? Like, this is the thing that I kind of grew up with for the last 15 years. Or join this community, the grassroots community that, is focused more on individuals' well-being and the people that they're helping, as opposed to how much money they can extract from them. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not trying to like overly, I'm not trying to sing my own virtues. I do think it matters to make a profit. I really do. Like if you can't make a profit, then how are you gonna?
Well, how are you going to continue doing?
So I do believe in the profit motive, as they say, but like.
But I'd argue most people do, because realistically, there are very, very few people out there, who have the resources or the capability of working for free.
Right.
We all do it.
Right.
Regardless if we love or hate our jobs. If you sort of said to someone, okay, well, I mean, you can continue doing this, but you're not going to get paid. People are going to go, I need to get paid, and But this is an interesting conversation, which is again causes issues, I think, in the cannabis community, where the argument I hear a lot is that, well, free the weed, cannabis should be free, blah 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 blah. Why are people paying for it when you can just grow it? You're like, okay, this is an interesting topic to debate. My standpoint is that if cannabis in the UK was legalized tomorrow, and say we banned every sort of multinational big corporation from entering the market, there is going to be no cannabis for people who need it, because there's you either stay with the sort of the cottage industry, the mum and pop kind of business models where you might be looking after a couple hundred people, but to get a standardized product out there, which I would argue I want to be able to go I want to be able to buy a certain strain, say like Blue Dream is one of my favorites. But I'd like to be able to buy that Blue Dream from multiple places and it all being the same. But actually with products like cannabis, that's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way we're going to create that is through some sort of standardization. And
Yeah.
the only way that is going to be possible is through some sort of organization, and business type model.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's like, it's a bit like people who like, Pizza Express, McDonald's. Imagine if McDonald's, every single McDonald's you went into, the 99p cheeseburger tasted slightly different every time. You're going to be like, I don't want this.
You wouldn't go there.
You're going to go in and buy your burger because it's the same 99p burger. If it's in Canada, if it's in London, if it's in Singapore, it tastes the same.
Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting concept, and we'll have to talk about it more, on the podcast, because I think it is an interesting one where I think people have got to be realistic with what the general populace will require. I would argue the general populace, if they find a product that works for them, it's no different to the fact that, I like certain beer, but if that beer tasted different in every single pub I went to, I would stop drinking it.
Right.
Same with like jeans I buy my same jeans from Top Man. They're 30 quid a pair. They're the same pair I buy every 6 months when I destroy the other pair of jeans. Yeah. But if they're a different pair, different size, different fit, different everything, then you can be like, this isn't working.
You won't feel back there. Yeah.
Because I think we, society, we like to be able to predict and experience. We like to be able to predict what we want to get out of something.
Yeah, totally.
And I think in an industry which is very complex like cannabis, I think we're going to need the research, we're going to need the money, we're going to need the structure, we're going to have to work with and embrace elements of this. I think we can do that by avoiding these huge companies which don't pay tax, don't treat their staff right, don't do pensions and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think as a community, a society, we can change that through how we vote, by where we throw our money.
Absolutely.
Very quickly.
And we have a chance here in the UK to support political parties and representatives that understand that. And there's no reason we can't have a homegrown, no pun intended, domestic cannabis industry and many other domestic industries that are kind of for the people, by the people.
We in the UK, and I know this will upset people from outside of the UK, but I say this with absolute sincerity. We have some of the best growers in the world,
right?
Especially for indoor, because that's what we've had to do.
Right.
I mean, the UK. I've travelled the world. I've been a big cannabis fan for many years. I have tried cannabis in every single country I've been to, and the US, Canada, they've obviously they've got a very, very good model, and they do an amazing job, absolutely. But considering the UK is the fraction of the size of like New York State, with a tiny population compared to North America, we've got some very, very talented people who produce very, very good products.
And by the way, those types of guys in Canada now are rock stars, and in the US, because there's this like huge mainstream movement to legitimize the whole industry. And these guys, among other things, make a lot of money in the legitimate world now in North America.
And
they're highly regarded.
So maybe that's it. It's that we are going to get companies like the Coca-Cola, the Starbucks, the McDonald's of types of companies which are potentially going to look at entering this space. But actually, maybe that's what people in the UK need to do. They need to start looking at really creating their own brands, really doing the best job they can, building up that following. So even if Coca-Cola does come in with, the £8 gram of weed,
Yeah.
you still got your 10,000 people, your followers, your fans, whatever like that, who'll still buy your weed at twice the price because they recognise the value of it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's the way to look at it. Instead of looking at people like Coca-Cola, et al., as threats, look at them as, well, they'll just service the people who would always buy the McDonald's, the Coca-Cola, the Starbucks. And there will be millions of people who do that. But maybe just focus on your group of people, if that's 10,000, 100,000, a million people, who are actually going to be all over you because you create the very best artisan, cannabis in the UK. So for me, I'm in two minds. I almost want to embrace Coca-Cola getting into it because I think it potentially normalize
Bold statement.
But at the same time, I'm like, do you know what? I think Coca-Cola, they're not going to have a clue. They're not going to be banging out good products.
Yeah.
There'll be other people who'll be able to produce a better, more personalised product to what people want, and we just got to find those people and support them.
I definitely notice, like, when I'm around you and other people who are not in the cannabis industry, as I've said to you before, like, I can see they gravitate towards you because of, like, for one thing, it's like authenticity, but it's like your product knowledge and your personal experience with it. You can't fake that. So Coca-Cola is not going to walk in here and then produce something that has the depth of experience that an artisanal producer who uses the product themselves and has been honing it over decades. Like, there's a built-in protection there for the people who have been honing this industry for decades. It's not all about the economy of scale or who can have the lowest cost and the highest production volume. It's like, do you have that real deep level of understanding and experience? It's not just sativa, indica, or terpenes and flavonoids. It's hundreds of different features interacting. And me, as someone who's been involved for 2 years, I don't understand that. But again, like, the people who are doing it and have been doing it, they have that knowledge and that credibility, and I think that's incredibly valuable.
I agree with you. I think that's that's the way I believe that this world is really going to sort of move towards. I think I've noticed this. My background of psychology, you can see this change in how people operate, what people are looking for, and especially over the last few years, there's this raised level of consciousness, there's more access to information, and to be able to make intelligent, informed choices about where you want to invest your time, your money, your passion. And to be honest, the more I look at big corporate coming into the cannabis space, I'm like, you know what, boys, knock yourselves out. You go for it. You go for it, because actually, if the big boys enter it, the governments will buckle. They're more likely to buckle quicker.
Right.
I was talking to somebody not so long ago, I can't remember who it was, but they were saying that, the British government are being approached by companies and businesses who are willing to invest, very, very serious money into making things happen. I think the UK is going to be almost like the kingpin of Europe for the entry into Europe for cannabis-based products over the coming years. Just through our skills in engineering and the pharmaceutical trade and all of that jazz. I'm not against creating bloody brilliant pharmaceuticalized cannabis products, because actually I think there is a lot of room to be able to improve little things, just how our body is able to digest and to utilize the cannabinoids. I was talking to someone not so long ago where they were using just raw Fetco full extract cannabis oil, and they were chewing through loads of it, like a gram a day, and she was like, I'm not necessarily feeling anything from it. I'm like, well, the problem is, because you're eating raw cannabis oil, your body probably isn't even absorbing 50% of it. Actually it might not be even 30%.
Right.
So you're losing 50 to 70% of this this medicine because it's not formulated correctly. It's not in a viable form that your body can go, yes, I know what you are,
right.
and I can absorb you, and I can, you're totally bioavailable. I can just, there we go, happy.
Yeah.
It's nice and easy. And I think, to create products like that, we're going to have money, expertise, and that is sadly probably going to come from whoever.
The big corporations.
The big corporations, as much as we try to avoid them. But no, I think there's a lot of opportunity moving forward. So we've been going now for about 90 minutes. So I think we should probably wrap this conversation up for this evening. But we'll certainly continue it on another podcast.
As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Orson.
Thank you. So, I hope people find that brief conversation interesting and enlightening in some shape or form. So, there we go.